Welcome to the Fantasy Throwdown Podcast, bringing you the latest updates from the world of sports, gambling, and pop culture. Because you can't have a show without hot takes or a Tiger King meme these days. Know what I'm saying? Now, with over 200 episodes and ready to get after it again, here's your host, Dwayne Callender.
Hello and welcome to the show, everyone. Busy weekend of sports across the board. We had baseball, basketball, hockey going on with the Stanley Cup playoffs / qualifiers. I don't know how you're going to actually quantify what to call this playoff season that hockey is conducting. Soccer as well abroad. So quite a bit going on. And, you know, of course, while everything is not normal because we have this current pandemic going on, we did get a sense of normalcy in that we, of course, had a summer story about the Mets and things that go caca involving the Mets because, as we all know, the Mets are a poorly run organization that calamities seem to happen to every year. It doesn't matter what happens. Something has to go awry for the Mets. So, of course, with the resumption of baseball, something had to go awry involving the New York Mets. So let's get right down to it because Major League Baseball has a host of issues on its hands at the moment. But at least let's take a little bit of levity over the weekend to talk about the Mets. On Sunday, this is what happened. You had a no-show from Yoenis Cespedes at the ballpark so that for their 1 p.m. game against the Braves, no one knew where Cespedes was. None of the teammates knew, none of the coaching staff knew. At 1:26 p.m., the Mets released a general statement from general manager Brodie Van Wagenen. As of game time, Yoenis Cespedes has not reported to the ballpark today. He did not reach out to management with any explanation for his absence. Our attempts to contact him have been unsuccessful. Now, a number of media members jumped to the conclusion of, oh my God, Yoenis Cespedes is missing. He may be in danger or possibly dead because the Mets wouldn't put out a statement like that sounded so dire if it wasn't so incredibly serious that they haven't heard from him at all. Here's the thing that the Mets left out. Yoenis Cespedes cleaned out his hotel room. Left the facility entirely. They didn't mention any of that. So this is why the media jumped to the conclusion that Cespedes was in danger because, you know, they figured his stuff was still there, so technically he should still be there. If his hotel room is cleaned out, that would basically tell you that he left the hotel willingly and voluntarily without any issues. Now, from my perspective, what was my reaction when I heard that press release? My reaction was, did the Mets check out the strip clubs in Atlanta? Because that's exactly where I was assuming Cespedes was. Given Cespedes' history of partying, random injuries, things that no one really quite understands what's going on, 2 heel injuries that, again, are quite random. The fact that he missed a significant portion of last season due to being injured by running away from a boar on his ranch. Yes, I did say that he got injured running away from a boar on his ranch, according to him, as one of his injury concerns last year as to why he was out, because he fractured his ankle running away from a boar. Can't make this up, folks. So my assumption was, okay, he went out partying. They can't track him. He's around somewhere. His agent's going to contact him. Only to find out later on in the game that the Mets were later contacted by Cespedes' agent and Cespedes had decided to opt out of the remainder of the baseball season. Now, again, from my perspective, the rationale behind this is Cespedes was on a prorated contract to begin with. So Cespedes needed to have a number of plate appearances in order to fulfill the vast majority of that contract to get up to the prorated remainder of $7 million. He was only scheduled to make $4 million this year, prorated. Yes, I know some of you are listening to that saying, hey, that's good money. I'd sign me up for $4 million. But, again, in the lives of athletes, those are very different numbers. So, in light of everything that's going on, what I figured happened was Cespedes saw that he was getting benched, didn't like the fact that he was getting benched, was not happy about the current living situations dealing with the Mets and everything else, and just decided, you know what? The amount of money I'm getting for this is not nearly worth the hassle. I'm just going to opt out because we've got outbreaks all across the league as well. You know, screw it. It's not even worth it at this point if I'm going to get benched and there's no chance of me getting those additional incentives. Because, again, folks, we do have outbreaks amongst the Marlins and the Cardinals. We still don't even know what the true extent of the Cardinals outbreak is. We know there's been positive cases with the Phillies as well, which is why the Phillies couldn't play until what's coming on later tonight against the Yankees. But, you know, there's just issues all over the place right now in baseball. So it is entirely reasonable to assume that there is some COVID speculation as to why Cespedes would opt out. Now, I have to say, to the Mets' credit, because they didn't get much credit in the media, and media trashed how the Mets respond to this. To the Mets' credit, the press conference they did afterwards, because I do believe the Mets were trying to shame Cespedes originally when they put out that statement that he was missing. I didn't think they realized that people were going to assume that he was actually in danger of dying or anything. I thought they thought people were going to react that, oh man, I can't believe he blew off the team in this way. So they did some damage control, in my opinion, and talked about how they, were hoping for the best and, just glad to hear that he's okay, and so on and so forth, and well wishes and, obviously understanding of his decision to opt out due to COVID. Here's the reason why they needed to do that. Because you have to at least give the appearance of looking sympathetic as an organization, because not everyone looks at this through a sports lens. And I'll get to that in a little bit. However, the New York media interpreted that press conference by the Mets as full of fluff and a joke, because they looked at it as Cespedes quit on his team, didn't like getting benched, and used COVID as a lame excuse as to why he was going to quit on the season and his teammates, and criticized the Mets for not going harder after Cespedes in the post-game press conference. Here's the reason why I say you can't look at this merely through a sports lens anymore and the fishbowl that is society at the moment due to the pandemic. The national news got wind of the Cespedes story and went off on a tangent about Cespedes opting out due to COVID concerns. They didn't talk about his performance. They didn't care about his performance. The fact that he left the team in the middle of the night and opted out due to COVID because he had second thoughts and reservations, per Cespedes' statement, that's what the national news story cycle went with. They went with additional concerns about COVID because Major League Baseball has additional positive tests beyond the Marlins, because obviously you had the clubhouse staff from the Phillies that got infected through the recklessness of Major League Baseball to begin with. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But and then we had the members of the Cardinals. We still don't know how many. We got at least 4, but the fact that they're saying that there are more positive cases ensuing, I'm thinking we may have another outbreak and be close to double digits with the Cardinals. But in light of everything going on with baseball, the national news media caught wind of Cespedes' story and took it in a completely different context. So that if the Mets had gone in the way the New York sports media wanted the Mets to go in, the Mets would have been crushed so badly on a national scale that without question, the Wilpons would be dealing with a PR cycle from the news media all week long about this. Instead, this story should blow over in about 2 or 3 days, instead of being a week-long cycle of having to apologize for Cespedes for not respecting his concerns about his health, when realistically, it probably is just due to him getting benched. I firmly believe that, he took his ball and went home, but you can't say that in this current environment. You can't look at it merely through a sports lens. Otherwise, you are just opening yourself up for a can of worms you are not going to be able to put back in very easily. So the Mets, even though this circumstance was beyond their control in previous years, would have taken a lit match to the gasoline and let everything burn up. But instead, they actually did a somewhat decent job of containing the story that they initially started by trying to shame Cespedes in the outright, which is their normal protocol, because when Cespedes emptied out his hotel room, the Mets had to have known that he opted out of his contract and left the team without telling them. Putting out the statement to shame him ended up backfiring, but they were at least able to mitigate the damage, because they could have at least kept this one a little bit more contained than the way it actually played out. But like I said, this story could have been a lot worse for the Mets, because if it turned out that they crushed Cespedes for being selfish and quitting on his team, and the national news media got that soundbite, oh boy, that would have been played throughout, and the Mets would have been answering for it all week long, guaranteed. Guaranteed. So where does that leave baseball at the moment? Because as it stands, baseball has more positive cases than any other sport at the moment. Because even with football, yes, we've seen some positive cases, but it's still not nearly to the extent. Basically, only college sports have had as many issues from positive cases as baseball. But baseball is actively trying to play right now, and again, baseball is in very much a precarious spot of having the season completely implode on them. As it stands, due to Major League Baseball's inability to exercise basic common sense, the Phillies have not played baseball in over a week now. Because after that game on last Sunday with the Marlins, when they knew the Marlins had positive cases, let me say that again. Major League Baseball knew the Marlins had positive cases amongst players and still allowed players that hadn't fully been tested yet, because, again, they had some positive tests come through, but they didn't retest the players after the positive test came through. They still decided to play the game anyway. Because of that reckless decision and not pulling the game off then, because, again, no one from Major League Baseball has actually been adequately able to explain how that game last Sunday between the Phillies and Marlins was allowed to play when they knew there were positive tests. They're saying it was communication breakdown. Since the communication breakdown, we had additional positive tests for clubhouse members of the Phillies, which meant that somehow it transmitted from however whether it was a close proximity to some of the Marlins players, or some of the Phillies players were close to the Marlins players, and then it inherently transmitted to the clubhouse staff. We got positive cases regardless, directly resulting from that game. Now, as it stands, there have been no positive cases amongst the Phillies players, but the rationale being exercised is additional caution as to why the Phillies games were suspended the entire week. Now, here's the problem with that logic. The Cardinals had positive cases come up, and they were only postponing games one day at a time. The Phillies were postponed outright. So there doesn't seem to be much rhyme or reason as to what evaluation criteria is being used. And the issue was that inherent to everything going on, their enforcement is so lackadaisical in terms of having a structured game plan that, again, Major League Baseball could say they have over 100 pages of documentation as to what the protocol should be, but they've been playing it by ear ever since the Marlins situation spawned out. So right now, as it stands, we've got the Phillies missing a number of games. You got the Marlins obviously not playing. And you had, as a result, some games between Baltimore not playing out. So you had a number of teams not playing directly impacted by the lack of playing time. And so with the Cardinals-Brewers series essentially getting postponed, the Phillies are only now coming back tonight to play the Yankees. And with weather expected to be terrible for tomorrow on Tuesday, again, you're going to be missing a ton of games. And again, I keep saying this, Major League Baseball ran this risk once they refused. Well, I wouldn't say refused. They said Major League Baseball blamed the union for rejecting the bubble idea. The fact that Major League Baseball couldn't push the bubble idea, but were able to push prorated salaries, I have a feeling that the story is much more akin to the union tried to use the bubble format as a rationale for getting additional pay, and Major League Baseball just said no. So Major League Baseball really only has themselves to blame, because there were ways of getting a bubble format implemented, and now they're at risk of the season essentially being canceled in less than a month, because Rob Manfred, MLB commissioner, has already prepped broadcast networks reportedly to have alternative programming in place in case there's another outbreak, because they may be forced to cancel the season within the next 2 weeks. And in some cases, they said the nightmare scenario could have happened within a couple of days. So, again, baseball is in such a precarious position. You got a number of teams that, could compete. But as soon as some of these other teams start falling by the wayside in terms of the loss column, I'm sorry, there's going to be greater need to strictly monitor the actions and behaviors of players, because some folks are just going to be looking at it and just saying, kind of going through the motions, saying, you know what, we're out of it. Why am I going through these strict adherences? I might as well just opt out the rest of the year. And guess what? There's a very real danger that baseball's running here at the moment, because now you've got players that may just decide this isn't worth it. We're not winning anything this year, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. You could hope that some guys end up being model employees, but that's not always the case in the workforce. So it only strains the supply chain even further when you have a disgruntled workforce. So I'm just leaving it out there, folks, that at the present rate baseball is going, there's a very real scenario, and I would say it's 30-70, 30 being the season actually completes. But at best, I give the baseball a 30% chance of actually finishing out this year, because I see way too many pitfalls that could come about in the next couple of weeks that give baseball serious pause to say, logistically, we can't make this work without further concessions from the players, and the players just saying, no, we're not going down this route, and just calling it a day. So, not to sound like a doubter and a Debbie Downer, but, there's just a lot of moving parts right now, and nothing quite lines up with the fact that we are going to be seeing positive news coming from MLB in the short-term future. I think we're going to be seeing a number of positive cases, and then it comes down to the contact tracing and how long some of those teams are going to be team members and players going to be out for. Because, again, in order to properly monitor everything, you got to be able to see what's going on. So every case is going to be different. So moving on, we're going to get into the NBA bubble in just a moment. So going to take a quick break here, and then we'll circle right back with some NBA news and updates. Stay tuned.
Don't go anywhere. The Fantasy Throwdown Podcast will be right back after our sponsors pay the bills. Welcome back to the show. Hope you got your popcorn ready.
All right, turning to the NBA now. What have we learned about the NBA bubble thus far? There's still no defense. Offense is way, way up. And because of the lack of distractions, i.e. groupies and other entertainment venues, the energy level for players seems to be quite high. So you're getting far more high-paced matchups. So the overs have been hitting in these game totals at a record clip. Over 85% of the games thus far in the bubble so far, and we've played through for a couple of days now, so we're near. Obviously it's a select size, but you've got 17 out of 20 games thus far hitting the over. So I have to say that in terms of where we got to be kind of looking forward on this is you got to be looking to kind of target from, at least from a fantasy perspective, looking to target the teams that are not very good and will still be playing in these slates. So in that respect, in terms of teams I would be looking to target, you're going to be looking at teams like the Nets. Brooklyn is basically playing a JV squad. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Kyrie, Durant, Spencer Dinwiddie's not there. Hardly anyone's there for the Nets at this point for the bubble. So I would be targeting the Nets. I am absolutely targeting the Wizards. Bradley Beal opted out as well. So you've got a number of teams that are susceptible, don't play any defense. Phoenix, definitely target them. And, of course, the Hornets, I'm saying Hornets, I mean Pelicans. I automatically see New Orleans, and I automatically associate them with their old designation, the Charlotte Hornets. But be that as it may, the Pelicans, woeful defensive units, only gets exacerbated further in the NBA bubble. And one thing that people thought might be an issue, but I thought it from the outset, being in this much smaller NBA court environment that's different from a normal NBA arena, because it's far more compact, the depth perception is that much easier for shooters. It's a much tighter arena. So when you don't have the large crowds that you're looking into, it's a lot easier to be a three-point shooter. I'm from my standpoint, again, teams aren't playing defense, but from an outside shooting perspective, the shooters have not been impacted all that much by the bubble environment. In fact, it's just as high, if not higher. So again, limited sample size, but it's not surprising why the scoring is up, because it is a case of you're getting both. You're getting the best of both worlds if you're an offensive player, because A, you're more rested because you're not traveling. B, you're playing a bunch of teams that know they really aren't supposed to be in this environment, and to be quite frank, are kind of checked out. They want to put up stats just to look good for scouts, but outside of that, they're not going to go out of their way to be putting a max effort and possibly getting themselves injured. Because you already saw what happened to poor Jonathan Isaac for the Magic. He blew out his ACL in a meaningless game, and you don't want to say you got injured in a meaningless game, but realistically, the game the Magic were in was about as meaningless as it gets towards the end of the year. The Magic weren't making the playoffs. Mathematically speaking, their chances of making it were slim. That's why, even in their current environment, the Magic technically are in the playoffs because the East is so bad, but it's by default they're in the playoffs, basically because of how bad the East was. The Magic really have no business being in the bubble. They're technically the seventh seed. Maybe they'll end up being the eighth seed, depending on what the Nets do. But the Magic really shouldn't be in here. The Wizards shouldn't be in there. I mean, I already told you that the Nets weren't. The Nets. That's like how the Wizards made it into the bubble again. It is more of a hilarity of consequences than anything else. How some of these teams got in, but as it stands, they had to finish out some of these games, so it is what it is. And some of these teams in the West still mathematically had a chance. So that's why the Wizards still technically had to be in the bubble, because mathematically they still had a chance of making the playoffs. But these bubble teams that are really there just for the experience, I guess, and showing solidarity, they're going to be sent out of here eventually. And that's when the real drama begins, because you may think that I'm talking about playoff basketball. No, I'm talking about the drama of NBA players bringing their friends and loved ones into the bubble and hoping that the friends and loved ones don't mess anything up and violate protocols, because I could see it now where family dynamics start playing an effect on how the NBA bubble holds up. This is going to be a very tricky balance to maintain for the NBA. Again, this is going to stretch out for 3 months. The bubble, in theory, is the best way of actually continuing sports as we know it in the middle of this pandemic for the U.S. because of the rising case counts. No matter who wants to tell you otherwise, the case counts are rising in the U.S. at the moment. The only way to kind of contain everything is in a bubble environment. But it still relies upon human behavior to drive all of this. So as some of these teams start vacating, family members are going to start coming into the bubble, and it's going to be that much more precarious to make sure that everyone adheres to the rules. So again, that's why I say life gets interesting in the bubble as these teams go away. Now, who are the players that I would say you need to be looking out for in the bubble that you aren't well aware of? Because obviously everyone knows LeBron and Kawhi and all the big names. But here are the guys you should be looking at in the bubble that you probably don't know too well. First off, I'll start off with the Bullets. I should say the Wizards, but from my recollection, I still think of them as the Bullets. But for the Wizards, you got Troy Brown Jr. being the star of the team now with no Bradley Beal. You got a terrible team. From a fantasy perspective versus real life, he's a solid, good player. He's developing his game. It's still going to take him some time. But from a fantasy perspective, Troy Brown Jr. is a fantastic play because he's a former number one first-round pick. And he has all the volume allocated to him in a dilapidated Washington squad that's lacking scores. Troy Brown is going to get a ton of volume to play around with. So that's someone I'd be targeting from a DFS perspective every slate I get. Another player I'd be looking at because of volume, TJ Warren of the Pacers. He dropped 50 over the weekend. There are more games to come like that, not necessarily 50-point games, but I could definitely see some 30 burgers, some 40 burgers, because the Pacers, with Oladipo still kind of a question mark, Brogdon still kind of a question mark, and Domantas Sabonis out for the rest of the season with a foot injury, the Pacers have to play a small ball type lineup, and so much like the Celtics, the ball is going to be free-flowing around multiple guys that can create shots off the dribble. TJ Warren can do that. So, you're just the same way you saw Jason Tatum have his coming out party 2 years ago for the Celtics, TJ Warren is in that very similar spot for the Pacers. So, I like the Pacers in terms of fantasy value in production because, again, they're fighting for a higher playoff seed. They can actually make some noise in the playoffs, and unlike Philly, they are a complete dysfunctional mess. So, again, you've got teams that are actually looking as though they may do some legitimate work in the playoffs. Now, why did I make fun of Philly? Because the issue with the Sixers, and it's the same issue that I see with that squad, even coming out of the 4-month stretch where we had no basketball. This team still has no identity. Still doesn't have much in the way of chemistry. They have so much talent, but man, it is very hard to take this Sixers team seriously when it's feed the ball to Joel Embiid and then figure out the rest of the offense the other 80% of the time, because they can't figure out what to do with Ben Simmons. They don't know who their point guard is going to be. Now it's going to be Shake Milton running the point instead of Simmons. Try to play Simmons as a stretch four and work it from there. But the truth of the matter is that even when they had Jimmy Butler, Simmons, Embiid, and Tobias Harris, they still needed Jimmy Butler there to be the closer because they didn't have a set offense. Philly is so dysfunctional that even in any playoff series, I have to make them the underdog because Jimmy Butler went to the Miami Heat with less talent, and the Heat are ranked higher than the Sixers. There is no way that Heat team is more talented than the Sixers. But because the Sixers have no identity, it is very hard, game to game, for that Sixers team to show any level of consistency. So, when they actually have to go into a playoff series, man, I really don't want to be playing the Sixers, but at the same time, I feel like I could beat the Sixers in a 7-game series, because if you want to tell me that the Sixers can play coherent basketball for a 7-game series, be my guest. But the Sixers have yet to display that ability at any point in the season. The longest win streak for the Sixers this year was 4 games, which, could win you a series. But can they actually, but what was the best stretch that they had for a 12-game span, a 15-game span? They've never been able to put it together consistently. And that's the problem. When you're in the playoffs, you need to have some level of consistency game to game. With the Sixers, you don't have any of that. It's just all slapdash. So, again, you can play the Sixers in DFS lineups. I'm not going to tell you no, but from a pricing perspective, it's just unappealing. So, to me, what it really comes down to is you play bad teams in the bubble. You sprinkle in a couple of superstars. So, whether you got Giannis or Harden or Luka Doncic, obviously you got LeBron and AD as possibilities, whatever. But you sprinkle in a couple of stars, but realistically, you're just going to be mining for all these teams that are playing really bad teams. and taking advantage of the fact that no one's really playing defense. So the bad defensive teams just got progressively worse in this bubble. And that's the way to kind of look at it from an NBA basketball standpoint. Now, as strictly from a fan perspective, is it nice seeing the bubble actually work as intended? Because from a presentation standpoint, yes. Because unlike hockey, and I'll get to hockey shortly as well, because I got to talk about my Rangers, the issue for hockey is that the NBA actually thought about the overall presentation. So having the virtual fans in the seats, presentation-wise, at least the pumped-in crowd noise doesn't feel as artificial as it does for things like soccer. It's actually better in some respects in terms of overall sports broadcast that we've seen for other leagues. Again, the creepy virtual crowds for baseball being one of them, where it's just like, who came up with this idea? Because this looks so tacky in execution that I can tell you didn't put much thought into it, versus what the NBA did was basically have the virtual fans use Zoom to be involved on the broadcast, and then you sell the tickets to be the virtual fan in the bubble arena. Brilliant marketing strategy. NBA got it right, unlike most of these other leagues that botched it in some respects to the overall presentation. So, in terms of how I think the bubble eventually going to shakes out, the Lakers should lock down the number one seed in the West. I still think the Clippers can win that series in a 7-game series. I got to see it from Davis just to see if LeBron is going to get that additional boost in the playoffs that he hasn't really had since Kyrie's been gone. That's part of the problem, is that it's a little bit of a misnomer that the Lakers are the overall favorite. I can't say that the Lakers are the overall favorite because they did get taken to them by Toronto the other night. There are holes in the game. Now, can they get up for it against the Clippers? Absolutely, because we saw, again, my whole critique on Paul George is, in big games, Paul George does not have the dog in him and disappears. But from a construction standpoint, the Clippers are built to give LeBron a ton of trouble. They're not built to give Anthony Davis trouble. So, if AD actually plays to his potential in the playoffs, yeah, then we're talking something with the Lakers. But until I actually see AD do it in the playoffs, we got some big question marks, because I think the physicality gets to him once it comes to postseason, and by the time we get to the postseason, these teams are going to start getting serious about playing actual defense. So we're going to see fairly soon how this starts sorting out. But when it comes to some of these other teams like the Bucks, they are technically the favorite according to Vegas because the East is much weaker than the West. But doesn't mean that the Bucks don't have their own concerns, because A, they got to stay healthy, and B, the Celtics are still right there. The Celtics, unlike the Sixers, have the consistency that can give a team like the Bucks a tremendous amount of trouble. And I actually have to give Toronto credit as well. Toronto knows how to guard Giannis. So, again, this kind of comes down to the fact of the execution standpoint versus what the overall long-term game planning ends up being. I think at the end of the day, when it comes right down to it, we just don't quite know how this is going to play out in terms of the playoffs. But in terms of the actual environment of the bubble, that's not the distraction. It's going to come down to the actual play on the court, in my opinion. The bubble, as I said, the biggest issue with the bubble that they're going to run into is as teams leave, family members come in. Family members aren't nearly as obligated to adhere to the rules as the players are. That's where I see the concern for the bubble. But from everything else, in the execution standpoint, NBA bubble has been on point. It's what the NFL should be looking into, and what baseball should have done. NFL not looking into the bubble is beyond reckless. And this news story about the NFL possibly moving up the opt-out deadline is just adding fuel to the fire that the NFL couldn't give to, about the actual players themselves. It's just one of those situations where it's clearly obvious that there's a lot more going on than meets the eye. So, without much further ado, we're going to take a quick break again, and then we're going to talk a little bit of hockey to close out the show.
Don't go anywhere. The Fantasy Throwdown Podcast will be right back after our sponsors pay the bills. Welcome back to the show. Hope you got your popcorn ready.
All right, now coming back into the other bubble going on in sports, and that is in the NHL. So, the NHL has been operating in this bubble of capacity for a few days now, but started immediately with playoff hockey. Now, the issue that I'm seeing, and the games have been competitive by and large, a good contest back and forth. But one of the most glaring issues that we're actually seeing is that, at least from what I can tell, and again, this is early because we've only had 3 days of hockey being back, but from what I can tell, the Western Conference looks much better than the Eastern Conference series, and the only thing I could rationalize with that is the fact that the Western Conference teams actually got to skate more. I'm just looking at the speed in which the Western Conference teams are skating at and being able to move and transact. The Western Conference teams look better, and that was not the case this year. The Eastern Conference teams were better than the West this year. It wasn't a question mark either. The East was better than the West this year as a whole. But coming out of the layoff and now looking at these initial set of bubble games, the West looks better. I'll just say, like, the quality of the games look better from a Western Conference standpoint, from a speed, just transition, tactics. Western Conference looks better. Who's going to win the Stanley Cup? Complete guess, because Colorado and St. Louis played a fantastic game, decided by 0.1 second on the clock in the third period. Colorado gets the goal in round robin play. So the way it works in hockey is that the top 4 seeds were in a round robin contest to determine how the seedings were going to work out in the next round. But in terms of the actual breakdown of the seedings, so you had the Capitals, the Lightning, Boston, and Philadelphia all vying for the top 4 seeds in the East. In the West, you had Dallas, Vegas, and then the Colorado Avalanche and the defending champion St. Louis Blues on the Western Conference side vying for the top 4 seeds in the round-robin format. And obviously, highest point total from the games gets the overall seed in the respective conferences. But, again, looking at the quality of the games, Western Conference looks better. They look sharper. And I have to attribute that as to, technically, the pandemic was not nearly as bad on the West Coast at the time. And so some of these facilities were open earlier than in some cases. Case in point, I'm going to get to my New York Rangers. My New York Rangers just lost earlier today, and it was one of the worst performances of the entire year. And the most distressing part about it is Rangers just got outplayed the entire way through. In the in the 120 minutes that have been played so far in this series where the Rangers are down 0-2, I want to say that the Rangers won maybe 10 minutes. 10 minutes of play in the 120 minutes that have been played thus far. It's been all Carolina by and large. Outskating, hustling, just execution-wise. Carolina just looks sharper. The Rangers still look sluggish. I don't know what else to say about it. The Rangers look absolutely sluggish. We thought maybe from the preseason game it could have been just I thought initially it might have been just the Rangers not wanting to go too hard against the Islanders and risk getting an injury. Oh, coincidentally enough, apparently, even though the Rangers weren't going hard in that game, Igor Shesterkin got injured in the game against the Islanders, which is why Henrik Lundqvist has played the last 2 games of the playoffs. Here's the problem with that. As much as I love Hank, Lundqvist cannot play the puck whatsoever as a goalie. He's afraid of playing the puck. So when you have a physical team like Carolina that's trying to play pressure hockey and forcing you to move the puck up the ice quickly, when you have a goalie that doesn't want to play the puck, you can't get the puck out of your own zone. So the Rangers basically are hemmed in the vast majority of the force of play. So the force of play in this series has been generally concentrated on the Rangers not being able to get out of their own zone. So I would say a greater portion of the game has actually been played in the Rangers' end, and more specifically in the Rangers' own third of the ice. Not good. That's why I'm saying, from a physicality standpoint, even when the Rangers are trying to be physical, they can't keep up the pace with Carolina because they're not physically, they don't seem to be ready to play this series. That's the distressing part about this. But I can't necessarily get too upset at the Rangers because, again, New York was the worst hit part of the country for months on end. And, again, while they've resumed to play, everyone's been practicing, that time off, I'm sorry, I'm clearly seeing it. Again, in the quality of the play, I said it before, I'll say it again, I think the Stanley Cup, if things don't dramatically improve, I think the Cup's coming out of the West again this year. Because from what I've seen from the Eastern Conference teams, even the top 4 seeds in the West look a lot sharper and better than the top 4 seeds in the East. Again, maybe these guys start working themselves into playoff hockey, and and while they're getting healthy, conditioning wise, they start improving, and that they're a lot sharper and crisper as the playoffs move along into the later rounds. But right now, from the start, the West looks better. It's just that simple. Right now, the Rangers are going to be playing a game tomorrow night. So quick turnaround, no day off, and I think the Rangers might be in danger of getting swept because, from a stamina standpoint, I just didn't see it in the Rangers. I'm not sure if doing the quick turnaround is going to do a whole lot of good because, to me, from a physical standpoint, Carolina's a lot sharper and fresher. It's obvious. The Rangers take, at a minimum, 2 to 3 shifts every period to actually get going. They can't start off 0 to 60, and Carolina has jumped on them every single period to start start each period. So, Rangers have taken bad penalties in the first minute of each period in this series. Again, part of it is pressure because when you got another team that's coming after you and they're faster and everything else, your first instinct is to hold and grab and clutch and try to do something else out a little bit outside because you can't compensate with what's going on. So right now, the Rangers look outclassed, and from a purely objective standpoint, they are not nearly as in good shape as Carolina right now. and there were extenuating circumstances, but on the record book, it's still going to count as a playoff loss unless the Rangers get it together. And I'm not sure that they got enough time to turn it around. So, but like I said, from a quality of play standpoint, it hasn't been Stanley Cup level hockey yet. But I will say that for the majority of the games, but I will say from the Western Conference side, the games have been good. They've been good. They like I said, the West is ready to go. The East has some catching up to do. So we're gonna see how some of these teams start picking it up again. Right now we got the Penguins playing Montreal. Montreal jumped on the Penguins early to take a 1-0 series lead, and it's best of 5. So again, that's why I say the Rangers could get swept tomorrow night because of everything going on. But I look at this and I say that there's a very real chance with everything going on that the Stanley Cup goes back to the Western Conference again because they just look sharper right now, and I think it might be a conditioning thing because of the layoff and which teams had access to facilities during the lockdown. Certain states weren't completely locked down compared to the Northeast, so some teams do have an advantage. But we're going to see. We're going to see. It's still very much early in the game, so we're going to see how this all transpires. But my initial thoughts, I just looked at it. I'm like, West looks good. West looks like they haven't missed a beat. In the East, definitely from a talent level is still there, but from an execution standpoint and just from where they were earlier this year of how they were playing, noticeable difference. Without question, noticeable difference. All right. And finally, to cap off the show, some of you are going to be looking for my mea culpa to Arsenal because I said that Arsenal had no chance of winning the FA Cup. And I've said this repeatedly to some of you listening on this podcast. So let me just say this. Arsenal did win the FA Cup against Chelsea on Saturday. I'll say this as an Arsenal fan. It was a unique and strange feeling knowing that Arsenal was getting the Manchester United treatment, because I've never seen Arsenal get the benefit of so many calls, so lopsided in our own favor, where we weren't getting called for pretty much anything, and Chelsea was getting called for basically everything under the sun. I'm looking at this and I'm saying, wow, this is what it's like being a Man United fan. So for the Chelsea fans complaining about the officiating, you're absolutely right. You could complain about the officiating. It was absolutely terrible and lopsided in Arsenal's favor. But Chelsea didn't play well. Arsenal didn't play great either because, when you don't have a back line, it's hard to say that your team actually played well. They played well given the circumstances. But when Christian Pulisic pulls a hamstring after Cesar Azpilicueta pulls a hamstring for Chelsea as well, you've got two substitutions you have to make right there. I'm sure Frank Lampard did not have anywhere in his mind that he was going to have to pull Christian Pulisic or Azpilicueta as part of his game plan. So, while I do question the starting 11 selection, because to me, Giroud is a second-half closer at this stage of his career. He doesn't have the pace to give David Luiz trouble. I thought Abraham was going to be the selection and just have Abraham just run straight at Luiz all day long and try to draw a penalty. I thought that was going to be the game plan. And then you bring in Giroud to be the closer in the second half. I'm genuinely thankful that Lampard didn't go that route. Obviously, I wanted Arsenal to win the FA Cup because at least it guarantees us a spot in playing in Europa next year, which we weren't going to be able to do if we had missed out on winning the FA Cup. And missing out on playing Europa means even more millions of dollars being missed out on for player signings in the offseason window, which is going to be a very quick turnaround because the Premier League is starting back up again, even with the Project Restart. They're not delaying on the restart of the season for next season. So the Premier League is resuming back again in less than 50 days. So quick turnaround. Folks getting right back to it because summer vacation ain't much of a vacation this year in the pandemic anyway. So it's not like guys are going off on a major holiday the way that we're accustomed to seeing in the past to begin with. So with that being said, Arsenal gets the benefit of the doubt. Now, in terms of who has the most to lose, because we have the most expensive game in sports coming up tomorrow afternoon. I believe kickoff's around 2:45 tomorrow afternoon. We have the English League Championship final playoff spot to be determined, because the way the way the English Championship works is that the top 3 teams get promoted into the Premier League and move forward to replace the 3 teams that got relegated. So the teams that got relegated this year for the Premier League were Watford, which again, I told you Watford screwed the pooch in the worst way possible, firing Nigel Pearson 2 games before the left of the season. I thought Watford could have easily taken points off of Arsenal if they had Nigel Pearson in charge. He wasn't there, and they got smoked. Then you had Bournemouth, who had the worst luck imaginable as a team, because every time that they tried to do something just it just was not Bournemouth's year. They either had injury, a VAR issue, because the team that did survive, and to be perfectly honest, actually I'm going to go off on this tangent here. We actually had, because no one cares about Norwich. Norwich quit on this season a while ago, even before Project Restart. So we're going to get into how Bournemouth got relegated. Bournemouth's relegation is due to Aston Villa getting a point against West Ham. How did Aston Villa survive, besides Arsenal losing in one of the dumbest fashions imaginable? How did Aston Villa get those additional points? Because Aston Villa was done and dusted weeks ago. So how did Aston Villa actually get the point they needed to stay up? It goes back to the loss Aston Villa should have had against Sheffield United. Because Sheffield United beat Aston Villa, but, and I still say this because even watching this game on replay, I still don't understand how no referee on the field couldn't see that Sheffield United had scored off of a set piece, because the ball clearly crossed the line. There are massive bodies around, but any referee on the field and the linesman should be able to see that the ball crossed the field of play. So, regardless of that, three officials missed the call. The replay official, the VAR official, who's supposed to be looking at this, doesn't bother to buzz the play to be reviewed, because according to the Premier League, the PGMOL, who handles the refereeing, the VAR official was waiting to be buzzed in, and because of the fact that the Hawkeye technology being used for all goal sensors didn't go off, which they admitted was a mistake. It's the first time it ever happened. Because the Hawkeye system didn't buzz in, the VAR ref didn't feel it necessary to at least take a closer look at the play. Everyone that could see it objectively, just normal play, could see that ball crossed the line. If you're just looking at it normally, you know that ball was scored. So not only did Sheffield United miss out on a chance at Europe with the 3 points that they would have had because of that call, but also, if Villa lost that game, Bournemouth stays up, and Villa goes down instead. That's really what it came down to. No one's going to say that because no one's going to want to blame the technology and the VAR official for a team getting relegated. But I will say this point blank. VAR and its current format of it being an optional kind of thing, we rely on technology. The lack of quality refereeing in the Premier League is abhorrent. And it's only getting worse, I'm afraid. So, by essentially having just clear and obvious errors being missed by everyone involved, we literally have a team getting relegated as a result of it. Now, Bournemouth is not blameless at all because Bournemouth had their chances. Bournemouth just doesn't have, just didn't invest enough in the team to survive all the injuries that they had this year. So Bournemouth and had some uninspired performances. Bournemouth, they found themselves in the position. But did Bournemouth deserve to go down any more than some of these other teams that went down? No. In fact, I thought Villa should have gone down ahead of Bournemouth. There were a couple other teams that should have gone down ahead of Bournemouth. But, like I said, Bournemouth had some bad luck. But sometimes when you have bad luck and then bad decisions being made around you, things can go sideways very quickly. And that's what happened to Bournemouth in this Premier League season. It is what it is at this point. They've gone down, but I look at it from the standpoint of Bournemouth definitely deserved better than what they got, but sometimes that's the way it goes. All right, so that's going to do it for the show today. Thanks again for listening. We'll get more coming up just because the amount of activity going on. We got Champions League coming back up again, folks. So, obviously, the matchup people are looking for with Real Madrid and Man City, that's coming up towards the end of the week. So, more to come in the world of sports. We're going to see what happens with baseball. Like I said, you got less than a 50-50 chance of the baseball season finishing. I got it more at 30% at this point because there's so much going sideways with baseball and not a clear direction as to how they're going to fix things. That we're definitely in for a wild ride the rest of the way through as we try to work it day to day. But that's all for now, folks. Have a good one, and until next time, stay tuned.